I
What?
still get this nonsense even today. Some of these internet heroes, these internet warriors, they claim to be able to tell who is a Jew, right? Because they have the special sixth sense to spot. They have a Jewish radar, so to say. So people still do that, and I got that a couple of times over the years. People saying that, oh, you're Jewish because you kind of I can sense that you're Jewish. So people still do that today. I'm just gonna show something here on the screen real quick. This is from our personal family records and photo albums, because obviously when you're German, your photo albums are full of Nazis, full of people in full uniform and the all the whole nine yards.
And of course, just to let the listeners know, you're broadcasting from Bavaria. I'm
Yes,
I'm here in the
exactly.
upper Midwest, but
So
you're in Bavaria.
so
Yeah.
right next, of the 10 kilometers in this or the other direction is Nuremberg, and you have all the historical sites where these big rallies took place and all that nonsense. And so obviously, the people on my father's side of the family and the people on my mother's side of the family, everybody had to get background checked. So you wanted to marry, you wanted to run for office, or you wanted to be in the SS or whatever, you had to get what's called an Ahnenpass. They will check your family several generations back, maybe 200 years or something like that. And so we still have some of these records, the Ahnenpass records. So everybody in the family had to be checked. So I'm gonna put something on the screen real quick here, also from our personal records here. So this man is Theo Benesch, same last name as myself. So we have these photos. We're the only people in the world who have these photos, right? So nobody else has them. And so there's a Wikipedia page on him, and there's Bavarian records on him, and some national records on him.
He was your grandfather's brother?
He was my father's uncle, and my father grew up with him for a while. When my father was very small. So, and so this guy, he was a true believer. Okay, so he became a big shot in the Nazi Party locally, then one of the highest people in Bavaria, and ultimately he went to Berlin, to the parliament in Berlin. And one of the jobs that he had over the years, he worked at Der Stürmer, the infamous conspiracy anti-Jewish publication. He was filling in because they thought they needed him for that. So he held various positions. At some point, he was almost like one of the leading editors responsible for almost anything that was printed in that rag. So here he's sitting on his desk, looking very proud, and in the same eyes. My father had the same eyes. And there's multiple people in the family. Most people in the family are almost men in the family. They had some sort of they're trained engineers, so they're not trained in history. They're not intelligence officers. They're not people who know about. They were not people who know about the empires and the intelligence world. So here you see him on the screen. This was pretty close to World War One. Now he was very young in the war, for obvious reasons. I think he was almost born in the same year as Martin Bormann, for that matter. And this is actually a postcard. So he had this photo made, and on the backside he wrote a text to his family. And here he's standing, smoking a cigarette. He fought at various different locations, and he was cold as ice. I mean, everybody described him as cold as a block of ice. He was unfazed by everything. Very strange character. And this here is this is a German official record.
It looks like Geboren, that's his birth date. Geboren 21st January 1899. Okay, he was
Yeah,
born.
he's this is, I think that it's called, what is it called? Frakturschrift. This is like an old type font that they used, and it's a little
Hmm.
bit hard to read, but
It's
um,
pretty.
Yeah, and it's like it says he was imprisoned multiple times. You know, when the Nazi Party was fairly young, because at some point the Nazi Party was banned in several parts of Germany, and at some point I think it was banned in the entire country. But he was sticking to his guns. He was a true believer because he read the older conspiracy literature that was very popular in Germany. So he thought he knew it all, like all those internet warriors of today. So he went to prison multiple times. And when you actually joined that early, you know, when you joined the Nazi movie that early, you had the best chances of a larger career. Same with Martin Bormann, was a very early adopter of this nonsense. And of course, Theo also had a very big career. He is in front of a very spiffy car at the time. Now cars were rare in Germany. You know, they didn't have many cars, especially not the fancy ones here. Yeah, of course this is the Stürmer, and this is another shot at his very nice desk here. And there's like an older picture, and this is of course his party button that you see here. Is
So what
wearing
happened to him at the end of the war? Did he die?
Well, he wasn't. He tried several things, business wise, to reestablish himself. But you know, various ideas. He pursued various ideas, and ultimately he died in an accident. But others in the family, they were also engineers. They had a company in Ansbach, which made precision gears, like anything precise and made out of metal, they would actually do that. So this is the family. So nobody was, as far as I could tell, nobody was ever an intelligence officer.
So
Nobody
you're
worked.
not a Mossad operative
Definitely
with that
not.
background. No.
Definitely not. So nobody knew anything about intelligence in the family. Nobody was ever like an intelligence officer. Nobody was a proper historian. Nobody knew the empires and how they functioned. So they thought by knowing contemporary conspiracy literature, they thought they knew it all. They could run a state. They could run an empire. They knew who the bad guys were. They knew what to do. And of course, this was complete garbage.
A sort of a very stupid view of the world, misconstruing things and simplifying everything down to, as Hitler said in Mein Kampf, to one enemy, right?
Yeah.
Germany, we can't tell the Germans, he says in Mein Kampf, can't tell the Germans they have all these enemies we fought against during the war. We have to reduce it to one enemy. And he, of course,
Yeah.
reduced it to the Jews.
And also
That was,
the entire communist, or as it was called back then, the entire Bolshevik phenomenon was declared a Jewish phenomenon. Maybe we should say a little bit about that because you know,
Jewish Bolshevism was
yeah,
Hitler's way
because
of understanding communism.
we had people like Lenin, who had, if I'm not mistaken, one Jewish grandfather who converted to Christianity, and all the other ancestors of Lenin were just Russians. You had guys like Trotsky. His father didn't care about religion. His mother cared somewhat, but ultimately Trotsky was just a Russian. And some others in the Bolshevik movement, they came from, or formerly came from, very low ranks of the Russian aristocracy, and a lot of the revolutionaries, they came from sort of this bourgeois, lower grade, you know, part of society, that people who didn't have that much, but they had some sort of an education. And of course, if you want to make a Bolshevik revolution, you not only need the warriors, you know, the peasants that you can make sign a contract and you know, give them a rifle and some training. You need the grunts, but you also need some more educated people, right? And so this is where they were looking. You know, this tiny little middle class in Russia, and some of the members had some Jewish background, some more, some less, because they thought, and I think even Lenin said this once, if you wanted to find some smarter people in Russia, you know, an easy way was to find some people that had some, you know, Jewish background, and that was the whole thing, basically.
The Jews valued literacy. Because they were persecuted people, they had to have literacy. They emphasized it in their children. And what happened is that during the the Russian Civil War, there was a strike of government staff. I don't remember what it was about. Solzhenitsyn writes about it in his 200 Years Together, about the Jews and the Russians. And in this strike, how could the Bolshevik government break the strike? But they had to bring in Jews. Jews were the only literate pool of people they could hire to break this strike of government workers. And so this is what ended up happening. This is how a lot of Jews got into the administration of the Bolshevik government. It wasn't started by Jews. They came into it as workers at the middle level to break a strike. And so there's a lot of misunderstandings. And of course, people talk a lot about Kamenev and Zinoviev and Trotsky. But in reality, as we've mentioned before on the show, analysis of the first Politburo, they weren't all Jews. They weren't even a majority of them weren't Jews. These were mostly non-Jews.
It was a bunch of Russians. It was a bunch of Russians, and this narrative was created that communism came from the outside and it was forced on Russia and all that. But ultimately, it was Russians. Russians did that to Russia, and also, some of these operatives like Lenin, they spent some time in Europe. Of course, we know that. This is not a secret, of course. But of course, this is what revolutionaries do. They try to go to safe territory and network and do stuff, and then they try to go back home and do a revolution. So this was a bunch of Russians, and also Lenin's father was a legit aristocrat. He was doing some improvements for the school system in Tsarist Russia, and he did such a
He was a
job.
school administrator.
Yeah,
in fact, Lenin's uncle basically paid for his father to go through school to become a successful school administrator. And his father was a pretty good guy, Lenin's father, who was really well liked and they had a wonderful family, except Lenin was in it.
Yeah, so
Lenin was the odd child, was the bad child, you could say.
And so there's a bunch of people that joined the Bolshevik movement, and also besides these lower, besides the bourgeois people that the social climbers or whatever. You also had the lower rank or the lower ranks of the Russian aristocracy, and we know that many of the so-called whites, right? Many of the so-called whites, they became Reds. They joined the communist or Bolshevik movement, and we know that some regiments at the end of the Civil War, some of these regiments, they had 80% or more officers that used to be of the white group. So it's like this is the Russian Revolution and the Bolshevism and the Russian Civil War. It's a very, very complex bit of history, and it involves intelligence agencies and it's like, and some of the stuff is even still secret. We don't have all the answers, and so it's a complex thing. But it's always an easy thing to call it Jewish and say that's your answer.